Hello, everybody, and welcome to another State of series, this time State of Angular. We are so glad that everybody is here to find out the things that are happening in the Angular community with some of the awesome members of the Angular team themselves. We're happy to get into all sorts of topics related to this, but before we get into that today, of course, we really do want to take a moment to make note of the terrible and escalating situation in Ukraine and just make a brief statement about it. At this dot, and of course in the Angular community and across our entire global industry, we know coworkers, family members, and friends that are being directly impacted as they flee from or are fighting in Ukraine. And of course, we know those that are just worried in neighboring countries about the safety of their families or about our uncertain future. We support the people of Ukraine in their struggle. We also hope, though, that this event and being able to come together like this gives everyone who needs it a moment of escape and also a feeling of solidarity and of community, which is something that the Angular community is great to give. Of course, we ask those with the means to do so to consider donating to support the people of Ukraine. If you're not sure who to support, we've included in chat a list of possible options of places that you can support. We would note that while this list of options given is collected by an American news agency, these are great options. However, if you are across the globe in any other countries, please check for any local resources or abilities or options that might better fit either your objectives or places that are closer to you and closer to home. So thank you everyone for taking that moment and for your support. Moving on then back to our presentation today, we are proud to be sponsored by This.Labs. This.Labs is your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.co or send us an email at hi@this.co. Of course, we are also hiring right now, so if you like what you see here today, events that we're hosting, or if you think you might want to work with some of these crazy characters that are on the screen right now at our agency, please reach out to us at jobs@this.co. We'd love to hear from you. And this is a smattering of our clients as well. So if any of these clients sound like people that you'd like to work with, please reach out. As I mentioned, this we have a series of events that are upcoming. So for example, we have our International Women's Day event coming up next week, which is going to be amazing. That topic is going to be focused on progress, not perfection, with 3 presentations and a panel discussion with women in tech from around the world. Definitely a can't miss event. We also have our JavaScript Marathon returning with a series of technical talks on various JavaScript topics, including Remix. So if you've been hearing about that technology and want to learn more, definitely make sure to attend that. Our Women in Tech monthly mentoring meeting comes back on March 16th. Just note that is not a recorded event. That's an in-person event on a Zoom call. So you're definitely going to want to sign up for that event so that you get the links that you can join. It's one of our greatest events that we do here. We also have our React mentoring event coming up on March 22nd and State of View coming up on March 24th. So if you like what you see here today, definitely come back and check out some of our future events. As for your host for today, my name is Rob Ocel. I'm a team lead and software architect at This.Labs. I've been using Angular since AngularJS was the prominent feature. I was there at the 2016 NGConf when really everything was about to be announced and launched. So I've been part of the hype train ever since it first started becoming publicly available, and I'm certainly excited to continue that trend here today. And Chris?
And hello, my name is Chris. I'm a senior software engineer at This.Labs. I also have been working with Angular since the AngularJS, and hello to everyone from Europe.
All right, now today we are happy to be joined by a wonderful panel of experts in Angular from the Angular team. So we're going to allow them to introduce themselves, starting with Mark.
Hey friends, so glad to be here. Thanks for having us. My name is Mark Thompson. I am a developer relations engineer at Google, and I'm currently working on Angular.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Rickabaugh. I'm a software engineer at Google. I've been using Angular since the AngularJS days, and I've been on the Angular team since the early days of Angular 2.0, and I'm currently the technical lead for the Angular framework.
Hi, I'm Madleina Scheidegger. I'm the I'm an engineering manager at Google at the moment, looking after the Angular team. I've been very happy to join them last year. And so since I'm a little bit near to the Angular family, I don't have quite as much of the length of experience that some of the others do with Angular, but I've been super excited to join the team, and it's been really fun to get to know everybody both in the company and outside of the company who's been passionate about Angular for many years.
Wonderful. So the first thing that we're going to do is the team, the panelists have set together a state of Angular presentation. So we're going to let them introduce that, and then we'll have a roundtable discussion. Of course, if you've brought questions or if you have questions that come up during the conversations that we have, please add them to the chat. Say hello. If you can, answer each other's questions and engage in conversation, but we'll be happy to bring up questions that you ask to the panelists later during the Q&A section.
Yes, I figured I'd just give a brief overview of some of the things that we've been doing in the last few months. I know it's a slightly different event, but I took the liberty of mostly basing this after the update we gave at the State of Angular Ecosystem presentation towards the end of last year. And so if you haven't seen it yet, I highly encourage you to go see it and see what update we gave there. But this is hopefully then going to be more new content for everybody. So yeah, we'll give a few updates on some of the things we've been working on, and also some of them will go into more depth in the panel as well, because we know that you guys will want to know a lot more, and this way it's not just me talking. The first thing we wanted to just mention is that we did now finally launch Extended Diagnostics. We're super excited about this functionality. It gives us an ability to give you some more guidance and some more options to give you, to make sure that people avoid some of the most common anti-patterns without making it actually a compiler error, because those are a little harsh for things that are, you know, maybe it's correct, but maybe it's also not a good idea. The two things we started launching with is the first one, which is also what you see on the screen here, called Banana in a Box, which is just making sure that you have your square brackets and your round brackets in the correct order and not backwards, because that happens all the time to me as well. The other one that we've launched with is unnecessary knowledge coalescing, of just making sure that you don't end up using double question mark in case you didn't mean to, and make sure you do the right thing there. We do have another list, and we'll go a little bit more into this in the panel as well, where we have a list of other things we would like to add, and hopefully we'll be able to add more, and as well get support from the community of adding more checks here. The other thing we wanted to, as always, like to talk about is accessibility. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong slide there. There we go. We did a lot of improvements in V13 for accessibility, and we're very happy to be able to talk about those as always and make sure we continue bringing them. One of the things we've been doing internally is doing quite a bit of an audit of all of our MVC components, making sure that we've gone through a lot of accessibility checks, which led to a slew of improvements that went out with V13. I'm not going to be able to list them all, so I highly encourage you to go through, to the slide, to the link that's on the slide to check the full list on. But some of the things we've done, many of the components were touched upon, is making sure that all of the target sizes are correct, and then we have the right contrast mode across the board. And so definitely that's just sort of the surface of things that happen on many of them. So definitely check out what else we've done. Beyond that as well, I know a lot of you guys were excited about the router changes to be able to update the title on each page, which is definitely a huge improvement for everybody, and especially also for accessibility. Beyond that, we have a few other improvements that we launched around making sure we detect focus trap and fake milestone events, to make sure, again, to help you guys build more robust products that help lead the way. I know everybody's excited to hear more about, oh, again, sorry, I keep advancing on the wrong slide deck. I know everybody's super excited to hear more about type forms, and after we closed the RFC at the end, towards the end of December, we've been hard at work implementing it, but then also starting to work on migrating all of the Angular products in Google. This has actually allowed us to detect some edge cases that we needed to improve upon in the design in order to make sure it will go smoothly and make it easier for everybody to then upgrade externally as well. And so while it hasn't quite landed yet, we're still optimistic it will land in the near future. But in the meantime, we've managed to continue to improve the design and make it more robust, and get us ever closer to actually fully landing this. I know this is a topic for the panel as well, and Alex will go into more detail at that point in time. The other one that I know everybody's always excited to hear about is standalone components updates. That's the other one that we've been hard at work. Again, we've done the RFC, closed it out, and Alex and Pavel have been very busy working on the implementation, working out all of the details. And as part of that, they've been realizing there's a few more API changes they need to make. And so look out for more RFCs coming to describe what other changes are going to be made along the way to actually make standalone components happen. Beyond that, what are some of the other things we're working on? We're actually working on trying to promote 3 CDK elements, the menu, the combo box, and the list box to stable. This is both a great way for you to have some more sophisticated components available, but also this will, as always, include a lot of robust accessibility to make sure that when you use those components, it will be in an accessible manner and make it easier for you to build out products that way. The other one I'll just call out is some of you might have seen that there was an initial PR for embedded view injector that then got reverted. We're still working on it. We have revisited the design. We have a better idea of how it's going to work now and are hopeful that this will land in the near future as well. But since I know that was somewhat amount being able to see this, we figured we might as well mention that we are still working on it. And that's most of what I just wanted to call out on some of the things we've most worked on in the last few months. As always, check out the Angular.io roadmap, and we'll keep you guys updated on various forums on what we're doing. And that's it. I think with that, as I said, a few of those topics are definitely on the panel, so we'll hopefully get into more depth then.
Great. As I mentioned, we'll start our roundtable discussion here. We have some questions that we brought, but of course, we've already seen the questions starting to come in with the chat, so we'll make sure to sprinkle them in throughout. As people are asking questions, please don't feel like only the panel can answer. If you feel like you can answer, please do engage in that communication and that chat in the YouTube chat. That is part of the community that makes Angular great, so please help each other out as well. But we'll get started. So Chris, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the topic that is like very often hard for newcomers in Angular to wrap their heads around is Angular modules, and I believe that standalone components is aiming to remedy that. Like, could you tell us what are the exciting things about it, and how it will help maybe Angular newbies to jumpstart the Angular journey easier?
Oh, absolutely. I can take that. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the statement that the hardest thing for newcomers to Angular we had around is ng modules. And we have had so many conversations on the team in the past few months to really nail down why that is. And what it comes down to is ng modules have more than one responsibility in an application. And often these responsibilities kind of have different scopes and different ranges of effect. And so they're really hard to understand because they're doing different things in different places, kind of different life cycles. And so what standalone components as a project is really about is the larger goal of the project is making it possible to write an Angular application without having to write an ng module. You'll still be able to use ng modules. If you're using a library that's published that uses ng modules, you'll be able to kind of import those and depend on them and use components from them. But the main improvement to the learning experience for Angular is that you won't have to necessarily learn all of the various ways in which an ng module affects different things. You'll be able to write an application, a fully fledged application, without ever having to write an ng module if you choose to do that. You'll also be able to start kind of converting an existing application and using standalone components in small places within the application and still interoperating with ng modules where you have them already, and kind of gradually move over to that brave new world if you're interested in doing so. So that's generally how we see standalone components affecting the learning experience.
So there was an existing pattern that has sort of grown in popularity in the Angular community, which is very unfortunately called the SCAM pattern, but the single component Angular module pattern. Do you see this as being an answer to that pattern, to give an official way to support it? Do you see them as solving different problems? Like, how should people that are maybe using this pattern or learning about it understand its relationship maybe to this standalone components feature?
It is very much an evolution of the single Angular module, the SCAM pattern. I actually really like the name. Yeah, so Scam actually factored quite a bit into our design discussions for standalone components. We looked at how people were using ng modules in various architectures today, and this idea of one module for a component really stood out as kind of the cleanest design, the cleanest way that people were interoperating with ng modules, because it makes it very obvious where things should go. And if you don't have one component for each module, then it's kind of a more of a personal decision of like, do I organize everything in the app module? Do I do feature modules? Do I do a shared module? It got a lot more nebulous, how to architect application depending on what you were trying to build. So I would say that standalone components is really the next level of single component modules. It takes the single component module concept and puts it directly in the framework.
And
Great.
I also love the idea behind if we move to standalone components, we finally will be able to not tell the newbies, okay, ignore this part, we will cover that later on, because then you don't introduce the complexity straight away. You can build upon that later on, which helps learning curve.
Yeah. So
this is a very, sorry, Alex, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Actually, what I was going to chime in as well and say, as much as standalone components started for very many different reasons, a lot of them technical, it does actually feed into one of the themes that we want to continue pursuing, which is helping to reduce that learning curve, because we have realized that it takes a lot of different concepts to learn to get started with Angular. And yes, there's always a lot of it is oh, and you learn more about it later and later and later, but that's still hard at the beginning. And so we're also hoping to continue to invest in removing the need to learn as many concepts early on. That doesn't mean that as you build out more complicated features and complicated applications, you're going to need them down the line, but at least you can get started and you can get part of the way in the learning journey of getting started with Angular and getting going without having to learn it all and then go down the line that way. So.
Yeah, so maybe coming around this idea of learning Angular and learning resources for Angular, there is a question in the chat. What kind of changes to the learning journey do we expect to see in the docs? And maybe to continue on that, how can the community help to build more easy to start journey for newcomers?
Mark, do you want to take this one?
I would love to. Okay, so this is my jam. You could tell by my body language that I'm really excited about this, because education is one of the things that I care about the most. Even before my time at Google, I was teaching at universities because I really care about the learning journey of a topic in computer science. So when it comes to Angular, we are taking a really deep, meaningful look at the documentation, at the getting started journey, and we're reevaluating, and then that reevaluation will lead to a lot of changes around how we do this. So I've been a really big proponent of letting the CLI abstract away a lot of the complexity. However, I found that through a lot of the discussions that we've talked about with Alex, Madleina, and other people, that's still not enough for new developers developers new to Angular specifically. So we're looking at that onboarding journey, and we're trying to figure out, well, what is the nice, smooth path? Not easy path, but the frictionless path. So that way, as you're learning, there's just no friction there. And internally, I can't give away too much, because, if you promise something right now and then we don't do it, well, that's a different situation. But I can say that for me, this is my top priority long term, for the foreseeable future, is helping redefine this journey and creating resources and creating updates in the documentation to really, again, create that frictionless path to learning Angular. So we're spending a lot of time and effort, and it's not just me. I'm just saying I'm one of the people who cares about this, and I'm working with the engineering teams, and again, everyone. We're all asking these really hard questions, and the really interesting thing about this whole process is, you as a developer on Angular, for example, so us, the Angular team members, we could see it and say, oh yeah, this is great as is. I mean, it's super clear where to go, right? You start with a component, and then you go to a module, and then you go to dependency injection, right? But it's really been interesting to have those assumptions challenged internally by ourselves and to say, yeah, we think that's straightforward for people, but it's not. And that's something that we've learned. I think my time on the team has shown me how much this team is open to learning and how we use those new learnings to make changes.
I want to take that question and then flip it around on the other side of the spectrum, and look at people that have been using Angular and building expertise in it, but maybe want to become expert or an architect, or really grow in their advanced knowledge of Angular. What does the Angular team feel is their responsibility in developing that set of documentation? Again, the community, of course, is so great at filling in some of these gaps, but how does the Angular team feel their responsibilities in there? And with chat, someone at Rodwin made the suggestion, has there even been any talk about having like an Angular certification or something official to help people demonstrate their credentials and their skill at Angular?
Can I start with this one, and then I want to pass it over? Okay, so that is something that on the learning roadmap that we're talking about. But here's something that we're going to be putting into work this year. So this person's on the panel with us right now. Alex has a really special ability to take some of the intricacies of Angular that are just really hard to grasp and making them like accessible. I don't know how he does it, but for instance, he just wrote a blog post about how the compiler works. And I read it. I was like, oh yeah, that's how the compiler works, of course. Yeah, it makes so much sense, right? So I'm going to be partnering with him, for example, and other Swedes on the team to create some YouTube content and blog content first. That is our first step that we're going to be looking at. And then I think we're going to be exploring what the documentation or other resources look like. But that's that first thing, is to create some series this year where we use people like Alex to talk about these types of things to help people get that expertise level. Right, but that's something we still have to spend even more time when we look at the documentation overall. For example, for expert, we have to spend more time looking at that journey. But right now, we're just really focused on the getting started. But we haven't lost sight of the need for the other stuff.
I would agree with a lot of what Mark said. I think we are looking at our documentation as part of a journey overall, and really thinking through that as a journey as well, right? Like starting with like when you first come to us. You're new to Angular, but often not new to web development. Okay, what does that look like? And then what's the next phase? And what's the next phase? And what's the next phase? I think we're currently focused more on the early tail because we realize there's a lot we can do there, and it's been something where we have a lot of excitement about ideas to pursue, and so we've been diving deep into there. But we're definitely excited to continue that journey as well and continue looking at that rest of there as well and seeing what we can do at the tail end, and especially having folks on the team sharing more of what we're doing. I think Alex even did recently a coding session where he was adding code, which is another way to maybe share our expertise on the higher end of the path. And so we're really curious to try and find a lot of different ways that we can share knowledge and that we can go beyond maybe just written documentation, especially as you go deeper into the journey of finding these other ways to engage and also learn from each other, because there's actually a lot of things, especially once you get to more complex applications, there's probably a lot we can learn from the community as well. And getting to know more about what are you guys doing out there and what can we adopt and share. And, even what Alex was saying, a lot of standalone components took the scam pattern and made it, into Angular. Are there other things like that we should be looking at as well?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So firstly, Mark, thank you for your very kind words. I'm very excited to work with you. This is something that I'm passionate about as well. A number of the conference talks that I've given in the past have been kind of, I think I call them like advanced Angular concepts or something like that, but trying to kind of share more than just the introductory topics. And this is also something that on the framework team, we've been trying to focus on as we start to design some of these newer APIs. So for example, yesterday I had several hours of discussion with a couple of team members about how bootstrapping a standalone component should work. And one of the things we're trying to do is really look at the API problem as not like, what is the single API we need to offer that does everything, right? But is there an API that we can offer that is the thing that 99% of people need? Right, which in the bootstrap case is just like, I want to start my application with an app component and some dependency injection. And then maybe there's a second API that you would use if you're kind of in the like expert mode and you're doing something a little more advanced than that. And so this kind of work tends to move slower because it involves API changes, which we tend to do rather slowly. We can update the documentation overnight, but changing the APIs takes a lot more time. But I would like to see us start to get a more clear split, even in our API surface, of this is what a beginner needs to know, and then this is what's available for an expert if you need to kind of do more than the beginner API offers you.
Awesome. I remember in 2019, I was sitting at Angular Connect, I believe it was, when I heard a presentation from the Angular team talking about one of their goals was to cut down on the amount of tickets and issues and open PRs that were left there. And I mean, if anybody has contributed to or just observed very large projects, I mean, declaring bankruptcy on these kind of things is usually what these teams resort to. However, a couple of years later, it really feels like the Angular team has followed through on this. And I saw an update recently on Twitter really commending the team on how much progress they've made in this regard. So first of all, kudos to the team for making this a priority. But secondly, I just wanted to ask, how has this process been for the team? What lessons have you learned that maybe people from other projects here would be interesting to hear? And what positives kind of come out of that initiative from your perspective?
I think my first response to that is it's slow and painful. Mostly because that is the case, right? Like if you're not gonna do the bankruptcy, it does require you looking at every single one of them. And there's almost no way that you can get around that without there being some amount of tediousness to it and painfulness from that. Because that just, if you're looking at 1,000 issues, that's what you're going to have part of that as well. I think a lot of it is, if you're going to go down this course, you're going to have to stick with it, and you're going to have to invest time and the resources into it. And so one of the things the team has been doing is carving out X amount of hours. We sort of do it on a time boundedness at the moment of saying we're going to spend X amount of time per week on this and just continually to chip away at it. I think we're starting to learn some things that we want to try and find better ways of automating, of like, here's, one of the most common things is that there's a request without reproduction steps, right? And there's very little we can do about those if we don't get more details from folks. And there's a bunch of other things along those lines too. And so we're starting to talk about taking some of what we've learned going through this manually in order to actually try and apply it a little bit more automated, so that we can look at the more, so that when we do spend time, we're looking at the ones that are more in depth and that we have to go deeper on. So yeah, Alex, I think you've been in the midst of all this, because I think a lot of this has been on the frameworks. By the way, the other thing is that some of the sub teams end up egging each other on. I know that when the framework team made the announcement of where they were at, the components team was like, oh, we should get to the same thing. And so sometimes a little healthy internal competition that way can also be motivating.
Yeah, I think tedious is a great kind of initial kind of summary there, but also very rewarding. We've kind of learned as we've gone through the issue tracker, especially the issue reports that people make. Like it's good to see what our community is actually saying about some of these things, and it's good to know kind of where the main problem areas are. So I've been glad we've been spending more time doing that. One of the things we've been trying to do as well is shift more of the get more signal from the community about some of these things. So for example, we have a process now where when you make a feature request on the framework repository, the community has a chance to kind of vote on it for a certain period. And if it achieves a certain number of votes, then it goes into a queue for us to look at and actually give an answer to. If it doesn't achieve that number of votes, we still tend to just kind of look at it and talk about it briefly to understand why it maybe didn't get the amount of support that the author might have expected. But that gives us a really good signal of which features might be worth prioritizing because they're issues that our community cares deeply about.
Maybe I will broaden the conversation a bit to we are currently officially post the Ivy Waking Room, and it seems like it was such a milestone to achieve, and everybody was waiting for it. What defines the next era of Angular? Should we brace ourselves for something new as exciting, or what are the plans for the upcoming future?
Standalone components are pretty exciting.
Definitely.
All right, I'm opening up the next waiting room. All right, everybody, I'll send the link. So.
I think Alex is right, though. I think that's a large standalone components is a good example of what we're hoping to focus on, which is the taking a look. It's a combination of taking a look at the features that have been waiting for us to really get to for a long time. I think Typeforms is an example of this. And the standalone component is leading into the other part, which also feeds into what Mark was talking about earlier with developer journey, which is we want to take a look at where are the rough edges in Angular, where are the places in the API which makes it harder, especially from that lens of that journey of both, making it smoother to go from being a beginner to being an expert in Angular, and seeing how we can make the language and how we can make Angular itself fit better along that journey. And so I think so it's less going to be one feature and one, here's the next big thing. I think we're all not as keen on trying to rewrite another large chunk of Angular, for example, but more of a thematic, I think, focus for the next little bit of that, finding the rough edges and smoothing them away and making that journey better, I think. And the good thing is it's actually not just, this allows us to give us a theme that isn't just technical, right? It actually goes across everything and allows us to have very sort of unified ideas across both technical, DevRel, documentation, and all of the other bits and pieces. So I'm actually super excited about having such a comprehensive focus that goes across it all.
I just have to say, as a community member, I agree. I mean, as we across a lot of communities, so we've seen all versions of this, from major projects and communities that have gone from waiting for one major feature to immediately preparing for the next one. There really is kind of like a community-wide holding of your breath when you're waiting for big stuff like that. And it was really exciting to look at some of the release notes and the roadmap for some of the upcoming Angular features and just realizing, like, is any one of those features going to rise to that level of being amazing? But I love that there are just many things in each release now of people just being excited for the ability to change page titles, the ability, some of those, the diagnostics that you mentioned, are any of those going to be the thing? No, but like, it just makes your life better in a lot of different ways. I think this is fun for the Angular community, like Christmas morning twice a year. I'm excited for this period.
I think that's right, and that's one for that reason as well. I think we can do a lot by, each individual feature on its own might feel, isn't that big of a thing, but they actually add up together, and that's what we're hoping, is that it might not be that any one of them is big, but they add and complement each other, and they're going to build on each other, and together it's going to create a much bigger change between them all. And that's, I think, more what we're going to try and attempt as a way of operating going forward. But yeah, I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to say something to this as well, or Alex, but otherwise we can also move on to other questions.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add is, we're coming out of this kind of renovation period, I would say, where we spent a few years kind of modernizing our rendering engine. And the challenge with a project like that is always your goal is kind of to achieve parity with where you were before. With a healthier code base internally, obviously, but you're not trying to introduce any big changes as part of this process. So having finished that, now we kind of have an opportunity to look at where we are in the web ecosystem and where the web ecosystem is moving. And there are certain kind of big trends that have swept across the industry. Things like micro front ends, right? This idea that we want these smaller composable pieces of applications instead of big monolithic deployments. And we have the opportunity to kind of examine some of these technologies and see what we can plan in Angular, right, to make us compatible with that direction and to kind of keep up to date with where the web is actually going. And so we've done some things along those lines, like deprecating and support for Internet Explorer, right, was a great modernization step of, hey, we can drop a bunch of polyfills and we can drop a bunch of code and things can get faster because we're keeping up with where the web is. And standalone components, it's going to be fantastic for the developer journey, but there's a kind of a second mission there, which is making it possible to consume Angular components directly and not need to load ng modules. And that makes them much, much easier to use in the context of something like a micro front end architecture.
Great. I wanted to touch on a topic that a couple people have now brought up in chat in a couple different formats. And the way that I like to think about it is that you know, the development community is vast, especially the web development community. And we are seeing especially certain technologies and approaches which have sort of transcended the frameworks themselves and have kind of become overlaid on top of it. So we had sort of the static site generation craze as Gatsby became really popular. We had Scully in the Angular community, or have Scully in the Angular community. We see that then back to server-side rendering, and tools like Next and Remix really gaining in popularity. Of course, Angular has Universal as well to address that. Now communities are looking at tools like Remix or Svelte that really try to obviate as much JavaScript code from the front end as possible. I'm just kind of curious, both directly and indirectly, you know, how does the Angular community address these types of trends? How do you monitor them? Like, does the team believe that any parts of these trends run counter to the goals of Angular? Are you trying to find ways to align with them? Like, how do you all work with those or interact with those broader trends that are happening in our industry?
I think, Mark, you volunteered to answer this first, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but...
Well, you are, but I think that the answer to this still goes back to the Angular team being in a learning posture, like just how we position ourselves, just as a learning posture. So we aren't in the hollowed walls of Google, just like, you know, Angular is right and nobody else is doing anything cool. That's completely opposite of what we do. So we see what is happening with Next and Nuxt and Remix and all of these like meta frameworks. And the first thing for us to do, and I want to hear from Alex and Madleina about this, is just to evaluate and learn. First, just learn and listen, because our responsibility is a lot different than some of the responsibilities of other frameworks. Let me explain what I mean. We have made it one of our core values to bring the community along with us, whatever we do. So whenever we introduce something, we try to move Angular forward, we don't do so at the expense of the people who maybe have adopted a previous version of Angular, right? We want to bring everybody along with us. So we can't just jump out ahead of something and just say, okay, yeah, we see these people doing this, we're just going to do it right now. That's just not how we operate. So I think that we see what these frameworks are doing, and we're trying to see what are the best parts and where can we learn. And then I think it's fair to say there will be some things that Angular just isn't a fit to do, right? And we have to figure out where those parts are as well. So we always have to take that position of like learning first, evaluating, and then seeing where we can, you know, add value to it, and does it add value to Angular? Not everything adds value to Angular as well. I saw some questions in the chat about things. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really, like about mobile, for example. You know, for us to build a first party like React Native solution, React Native style solution, right? Like that. We don't think that adds value to Angular. There are already some great solutions out there that are solving that problem. But we still talked about it. We still looked at what React Native was doing to see if it was interesting for Angular to take that direction, right? And so it's the same thing with these meta framework solutions as well. And yeah, I want to hear from Alex, as you know, knowing more about things like Universal. I definitely want to tag Alex in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of see this as Angular has really two responsibilities to its users. One is to be, as Mark greatly put it, like constantly in a learning posture, right? Constantly looking at the trends in the ecosystem, where things are going, how technology is evolving, and making sure that we don't get stuck and stagnant somewhere, right? But the second responsibility that we have to our users is to lead them in the right direction, right? To not make big technological moves without the speculatively, right? To not push into a technology or a space and then realize a year later that this was a mistake and we shouldn't have done this, and we have to kind of deprecate that part of Angular and somehow move people off of it. So we have a responsibility to kind of move slowly and move deliberately. I think one of the Angular framework team members, Andrew Kushner, put it really, really well in a recent meeting. He said, Angular is a big ship, right? And we're not the fastest ship out there, but we have a responsibility to the people we're carrying with us to kind of take them in a good direction. You can rely on the fact that we are making these decisions deliberately.
I think there's one more angle, which is maybe more my engineering manager hat, more than a technical hat, which is that there's also a limit to what we can do, right? Like at the end of the day, we can't be everything for everyone. And so we're also going to have to make some calls on what makes sense for us to invest in, because the worst we can do is build a lot of things and then not be able to support them and then have them decay and wither in some ways. And so that's part of it for me as well. When we're having these conversations in a team as well, where do we want to proceed? What do we want to pick up? Is that we also want to be conscious of what are we capable of bringing users along and keeping them along the way as well, right? Because as I said, I do think one of the worst things we can do is start building something and then let it wither and rot in many ways, right? And so it's probably maybe not the sexiest answer or the nicest answer, but it is also part of, as we think about our planning, is what are we capable, what else can we take on, and where are we better off working with the community more than maybe we have in the past, or continue to work with the community on how we complement each other in our efforts rather than trying to do everything all by ourselves.
I did want to kind of follow up and just expound on something that I think, Mark, you were sort of touching on. And it's that, as community, how to be a better community members. Of course, we all get excited by seeing different technologies that may or may not be compatible with Angular yet. And so I know y'all probably have to close a lot of issues, or wherever you go, you always hear, what about X for Angular? And that's great. Like, I think that enthusiasm is probably great. I also happen to be a gamer as well. So I hear a lot of this feedback from game developers that are like, don't just say, why can't you be like X? Why don't you tell me, kind of your feelings, what it is that you wish that you can't do, that you wish you could do? What are your pain points? So just kind of, I guess my question is, beyond that, how can the community better give that feedback, I guess? So if somebody finds themselves saying, I wish there was X for Angular, how else can we do it that might help the team have a better conversation, or maybe lead to an outcome that's better for the community?
I can think of at least one way, and I'll open it up for the rest of our team to talk about this, but one way is through the GitHub process. So when you leave feature requests, that's how we know. Like, we read that stuff. Like, we just spent some time talking about how much time we spend in GitHub going through the issues and PRs and all this stuff. We read it and we pay attention, right? So that's one way to give us feedback. Along in that same vein is the RFC process. Like, if we present something like type forms, and you need something else besides what is provided, then leave that feedback. And RFC is not us saying, this is what we're going to do, so we're just putting you on notice. Well, no, that's an announcement blog post, right? And RFC is literally a request for comments. So we really want that feedback, because we don't know everything. Like, one of the things that with my son that I say all the time, it's really hard, is that I'm like, use your words, because I want to give you what you need if I can. But you have to tell me, because we can't do it otherwise, because I just can't read his mind, right? And the same thing with the community, like, not that we're your parents, but we're just saying we can't read your minds, though. So let us know via GitHub when we do put out RFCs. Let us know. Submit an issue, or feature request. We read them. We have a process that we've outlined about how we even go about looking at which new features will be included in the framework or will take on for development. We've defined that stuff, so take advantage of that. Don't think that your voice isn't heard just because you're just one developer working on a project someplace else. No, your voice is very valuable to us, because if you're not with us, we're not listening, then how can Angular ever be all that Angular can be?
Yeah, like follow. Sorry.
I'll elaborate on that just a little bit. The question of, like, what about X for Angular, right? As you said, that's maybe not necessarily the best way to express a need. I would say if you're intending to come to GitHub and post a feature request about something like that, something more useful for the team is like, hey, I've used this technology X, right? And it allows me to do these specific things, but I can't figure out how to do them with Angular, right? Is there a way Angular can be extended to support these use cases that X allows me to do with some other technology? And I think that is very actionable feedback for us, because we can decide, yeah, Angular absolutely should be able to solve these problems. Maybe it already does, and we tell you how to do it. Maybe it doesn't, and we add that to our backlog. Or we can say, like, hey, actually not an area where we feel like Angular can add a lot of value. or not an area that we have the bandwidth to kind of support and move into.
Chris, I think you were going to chime in as well.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask follow up on the RFC topic, and since you already mentioned that typed forms are at the end of almost closed with the RFC. What I wanted to ask, what were the input from the community that was shaped the current form of this feature, and how it maybe this will inspire some people to comment more on the possible new features.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk a little bit about this. So when we were putting together the typed forms RFC, one of the things we do for any RFC is to talk internally first about what, besides the general feedback of here's the design, what do you think about it? Are there any open questions where we as the team don't necessarily know what people need enough, and we want to ask the community, hey, what do you think about, this question or that question relating to the design? And so one of these things in typed forms concerned types that you would call like form record or form tuple. So there are different kinds of form group that you can imagine in a typed world and form array. And we asked the community, hey, would you find something like a form tuple useful? And the community's answer was generally no. Like, there weren't many people who said, I need exactly this functionality, which is good because it was really complicated for us to support. So that feedback was very useful because it let us kind of trim something off of the design that we were worried about finding a way to integrate. At the same time, the community said, yes, I do need this concept of like a record type. I need a form group where I can just add any number of controls to, completely, almost dynamically. And so that is something that we want to focus on supporting as a use case with type forms.
Going back to the earlier question real quick, I wanted to give one more shout out in ways of giving us feedback, which is, for example, we just had our survey towards the end of last year asking for you guys' satisfaction and what's working, what isn't. That's another great place to be specific, right? We actually do go through a lot of the comments and read through them and try and cover them. And that's where, saying, hey, why can't you be more like React? And I'm not saying we actually got these comments, we actually, but just using it as an example, right? And just saying, hey, why can't you be more like React or more like Svelte isn't very helpful. But if you can say, here's the things I'm running into, here's the functionality we're missing. Again, it goes to what was mentioned earlier, but I wanted to call out that when we ask for surveys or we post things on Twitter and anytime we ask for feedback in those ways, the more specific you can be about what you're trying to achieve or what you're not able to achieve or what bugs you're running into, that will help us much more so than just naming another technology, because we won't know what it is about the other technology that you're looking for, and the more specific you can get, the more we can actually do something with the information.
Yeah, a really good example of this, I think, is I've gotten kind of feedback in the past. Hey, why doesn't Angular support virtual DOM, right? And if you know how Angular works internally, you know that kind of change detection and virtual DOM are fairly solving equivalent problems, right? They're both ways of taking a change in the model and applying it to the view. And so, Angular is not going to have virtual DOM. We don't need to we went a different route technologically. But people ask that question for a reason, right? Quite often they're having a performance problem in their application. They've done some research and they've read somewhere that like virtual DOM is really fast. And so they ask us like, why don't you have this technology that I've heard about and I've heard that it's fast, right? And what they really are trying to say is, hey, my application is slow, right? I have this actual problem. And if we can engage with them and get to the bottom of that, right, then we can understand, oh, there is a change we can make in Angular to make their use case faster, which has nothing to do with virtual DOM. Virtual DOM is just a false kind of symptom, right? So yeah, definitely tell us what the problem is, right? Not necessarily what you think a good solution might be. Definitely, we want to hear your ideas about solution, but defining the problem is important.
It's hard to believe an hour has gone by so quickly. But I definitely wanted to make sure that we got a chance to talk about this piece as well, which is that it's one about community engagement. Now, obviously, after 2 years of the pandemic, and of course the things that we talked about, unrest, the old normal still feels like it might be a ways off. So how has the team adapted to a world with fewer in-person events? I've seen, of course, the rise of Discord communities really take off in the last year or so, which has been amazing in the Angular community. If you're not familiar with some of those, maybe we can share some of those resources in chat, but we've definitely seen those develop. How is the team adapting this strategy on how to meet people and meeting people where they are these days?
Sure. I want to take this one because I'm in DevRel and I spend a lot of time talking to people in the community. This is part of my everyday job. And I think that we've been able to leverage virtual technology the most. I mean, so for example, I spoke at events in 5 different continents over the last 6 months. And then I met communities in places that I would have never been able to go to, or let's not say never, but let's just say it'd been really hard to get to some places or get budget to go to some things because, for example, flying 20 hours to go to some place in there, let's say, is a smaller community. It's harder to do some of those things, but I got to go to those things anyway, right? I got to show up. The team got to show up to events where, communities that are just being built up in Angular, and they may only have 8 developers in their community, but here we are getting to meet them and interacting with them, which would have been so hard if the only way we connect with people is in person, because those people might just say, oh, they'll never come here, so not even try. So I think that one of the best things about the way we've had to adapt by doing everything virtually is the access that it has given the community to us as the Angular team. It has given this incredible access to us that we're, when would you have been able to meet Madleina outside of a big conference before something like this, right? She be at a big conference, but would you have been able to have her go to your meetup? Maybe, probably not, right? But now people get to meet her, and then they get to learn from her. They get to meet Alex. They get to meet Minko and Emma, and get to interact. And so the virtual stage has been a game changer for providing equity of opportunity for the different communities that we get to engage with. Right now, you don't have to just come to I/O to meet us, which I think is really important. And then I just say meet us, but I should really say interact with us so we can learn from you as well. Right, we keep talking about learning. I mean, so it's just an amazing thing. At first, it was a bummer because I love to be in person with people. I love the idea of interacting and giving out high fives. You know what I mean? And just all right, everybody, get that hand up, high five to you, right? All that type of stuff I get to do in person feels really different, right? And then adapting virtually was a challenge, but I'm so glad that we did. I'm so glad that we did because now we get to interact with so many communities. And the other thing that's really interesting is the number of communities that are just being built up in Angular, right? I look at the community, let's just say Angular Nation, for example. That's one community where they're doing some really cool stuff to support Angular learning, right? I look at, Lars and this is learning, this is Angular, those types of events, you know what I mean? And communities that are they're being built up. Look at the Discord, the Angular Discord. You see what I'm saying? So technology saved us. Let's just be honest. Technology saved us all because we would not have been able. So imagine not having the ability to do StreamYard at this level of fidelity, right? At the start of the pandemic. We didn't have StreamYard. We didn't have Zoom. We didn't have Google Meets, right? Technology came through and offered a really incredible opportunity for us all to connect.
And I do want to echo the equity piece of it as well. I think that it's easy for us to focus on what we are lost, maybe, but it's always good to focus on what we've gained. And I think Mark made an incredible point about how much more, in some ways, this actually has allowed us to connect with a lot more people in a lot more spaces. And part of it is just time, right? There's only so many places we can be in at once, and how many, especially if, as Mark said, there's a 20-hour flight. That's 2 days, 1 day forward, 1 day back, plus there, and there's only so many of those you can do. And so it's incredible for us to be able to take advantage of it. And we'll continue to want to do that as well, even as we go back and have some in-person events. I don't want to lose what we've gained there. And the other thing we're trying is a lot more medium. I think compared to the beginning, we might have more brain space now than when the pandemic started. Or what it is, but I've seen a lot more interesting things recently where we're trying different things. So if you haven't, for example, seen Mark's and Jeremy's game streaming yet, right? It might not be fully about, it's a different way of connecting with people. Or Alex doing a live coding session, right? So we're also still trying and curious about other ways we can connect and other ways we can do it, and curious to hear other things that people want to try with us or participate in, and seeing other ways we can, differently than what are all the different formats that we can talk with each other and connect and learn from each other in these regards as well. And I'll just mention as well that, from a team perspective as well, we actually took this opportunity to mostly go virtual, and we'll continue to work in that way. And so we're looking for periodic ways of getting together, and we're looking forward to that. But I think in general, we are trying to pivot, not just with the community, but also with the team itself, to being in a much more virtual environment, because it is actually allowing us to meet people where they are, and it's expanding the folks that we can work with on a regular basis compared to all of the ones that just want to be in one place. And so again, it's the equity piece of it that is leading a lot of the way here.
Great. As I mentioned before, an hour goes by really quickly, so we are here at the end. I think we're going to give everyone an opportunity to say goodbye. If there's anything that you want to bring people's attention to, or any final thoughts that you want to share, please feel free. We can go to my side as I see them, but I'll start and first of all say that we could have had this conversation going for another 3 hours. There is so many more cool things going on that we could have talked about, and we'll definitely talk about in future conversations. So my takeaway is that in 2022, the state of Angular is strong and the community is growing. This is an exciting time to be an Angular developer. There are some really exciting features coming down the pipe, and the communities are continuing to grow and support each other. So, if you're just joining the community, it's a great time to, or if you've been a part of it for a long time, so hopefully you're as excited as we are to see what's coming up. So that's my takeaway. Chris, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I just think that Angular is not stopping, and we are still it is still delivering new features and ways to improve it, your code. So keep just listen to the news, and you'll be happy with them.
Alex?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the organizers here for putting on such an excellent State of Angular show for us. I agree. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be working on Angular. Last year, kind of towards the end of the year, when we were sitting down and starting conversations about like what are the things we're going to do in 2022. One of the hardest aspects of that was there was so much that we could do. There were so many ideas and features and things we wanted to improve, and paring down and finding, okay, these are the most important ones to work on was extremely challenging, right? Because we have so much opportunity ahead of us, and I'm very excited to be tackling all of that.
Awesome. Mark?
Okay, so first, again, echoing Alex, thank you for having us today. Two things I want to say. One thing is, if your question didn't get answered today, which you really want to know the answer, come to the game's Q&A on Friday. Check out the Angular YouTube channel and Angular Twitter for times. You can find out there. And the last thing is this: a lot of people are hurting around us in our communities. We know there's a lot of stress on the world right now. Look around, and if you're feeling a little bit like you don't know what you can do, ask yourself, what's the smallest thing I can do to help? How can I be a helper? And I think that will at least help us to help others around us and to take care of one another, because right now that's needed more than ever.
Yes, thank you as well for having us. This is always exciting to chat with each other, and it's a great way of connecting. I think you also started at the beginning of saying it's good moments to come together as a community and be there for each other, and spend time with each other in ways that we can at the moment. I think before I go into more profound, like just really quick, since Emma wasn't here, I feel like unfortunately she couldn't join us at the last minute. I do feel like I want to shout out again for accessibility and the work she's been doing amazingly at championing accessibility and all of that. So you haven't looked at recently and all the things that she's been broadcasting about it, take a look and make sure you get up to speed on everything she's been doing there. Beyond that, I think echoing what Mark said is the moment it feels, and I think the last 2 years have often felt tough, right? There's a lot going on. There's been a lot of churn and turmoil around us. And the best thing we can do is focus on each other and find the small ways to help each other. And so if there's one thing you can do between now and Friday that just helps one person around you, that will make the world a better place.
Great. Well, thank you from all of us. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all in the chat for participating and being so active and supporting each other and answering each other's questions. We certainly love to see that. Hopefully we'll see you all at future events, both Angular and other state of events in our community. And again, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.